Welcome everyone to this second Sustainable Diets Hub Q&A. Today we're going to be looking at food waste. So food waste is an issue because of the greenhouse gas emissions that are produced when the food is decomposing, but also because of the energy and resources that it has taken to produce the food in the first place. 70% of food is wasted in the home, and we mainly waste food because we just don't use it up in time. But don't fear, because today we have the lovely Alice from Root to Nutrition, who is going to be giving us her top tips on how we can reduce our own personal food waste. Welcome, Alice.
Hi, thanks for inviting me.
Oh, no worries. Thank you for joining us. So before we begin, could you give us a little introduction about yourself, like what you like to do and your nutrition career so far?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Alice. I'm from Root to Nutrition. I founded Root to Nutrition last year in the great 2020 of history. This is a nutrition consultancy for private clients and businesses, and I aim to just really empower people around nutrition, to make nutrition fun and, to inspire people to get in the kitchen and get cooking. So over the past 6 years, I worked in the food industry in a lot of different roles, from, working with a food manufacturer to working in corporate catering, which is where I met the lovely Emily. And more recently, in the last few years, I did some work as a chef and did some training. And more recently, I joined the Jamie Oliver team to work part-time as well. So I kind of divide my time between, working and freelance. In my spare time, I love to do lots of recipe development. I have a passion around sustainable nutrition, and it's definitely something that I always communicate with my clients is, what easy things can they do to make it a little bit more sustainable for them.
Yeah, no, and if you don't follow Alice on Instagram, do, because she has an array of amazing recipes and they all look so yummy. But what I love about what you do is that you always make it so versatile. So if you don't have a specific ingredient or you want to kind of mix it up, pair it with something else, you always share how to do that. So it just makes it even more accessible, and they just look delicious all the time. I wish I lived with you. So if we start by you providing us with your top tips for reducing food waste.
Absolutely. So I think when, thinking about doing this video, you can be so overwhelmed by all the different tips and advice and accounts that are out there. So I think, you just got to remember that you do what you can.
Yeah.
And that's good enough. There's no pressure around having to do everything. And obviously today we'll only talk about a few of those tips. We're not going to cover everything. So I think my number one tip is to plan your meals. So, you can go online and download a meal planner very easily. It doesn't have to be a fancy thing that you buy. And I always advise my clients to plan out their dinners, because this is usually the time which, we over make stuff, or it's the meal of the day that you're most concerned about is dinners. Another thing is to remember to reinvent your leftovers. Now, I absolutely love doing this. And it inspires people to think about food in a slightly different way. So for example, I've got a really good bean chili recipe that I do. So one day I may have that, as a quesadilla type situation. The next day I might have it for breakfast as like a spicy beans on toast. Everything seems to be better with an egg in our household. So fried egg, poached egg, anything with an egg is great. You can make this into like a salad bowl, with all the different veggies in your fridge, into a burrito, jacket potato. So you've got to remember that one recipe can make so many other recipes. So that's what I hope, my page inspires, is for people to reuse their food and reinvent. So some other things around reducing food waste. is, you know, when you're going shopping, to look at the use by dates for your fresh food.
Yeah.
So this is namely around, you know, meat and fish and poultry, which can have quite a short shelf life. So I would say, you know, once you've planned your meals and you've got a good idea of where you're going throughout the week, when you get home, perhaps have a look at those use by dates, and you might need to move things around. So for example, if your chicken goes out of date in 2 days' time, then maybe cook that tomorrow, just so that you're keeping on top of, you know, use by dates within the fridge. And obviously we know that best before dates aren't particularly helpful. And to always, you know, I've got things in the fridge that may be over a week out of its best before date. And, you know, you've just got to think, have a smell. Does it smell slightly strange? I think with things like leaves and herbs, if we see one leaf, you know, a bit sad and a bit brown, we tend to throw out the whole bag. But actually, if we just spend 30 seconds picking out the bad bits, exactly, then it's just as good as well.
Yeah, I had an avocado the other day that was 4 days, though the best before said it was like past 4 days, and I opened it and it was the most amazing avocado ever. It was like almost like it glowed as I opened it. It was
avocados are so strange, because even if you buy like ripe and ready, they're often not ripe and ready. So yeah, it's good to just remember also most foods can be frozen. So even things like milk and cheese, which you may want to grate before you freeze, you know, and if you do have lots of leftovers, then to use things like Tupperware, and these are from our local takeaway, and to put them into smaller portion sizes, so that when you defrost it, you're not having to defrost like 3 meals worth. It's always good to remember.
Yeah, no, I really like that. I've done that with like a bag of spinach before as well, because obviously very rarely am I using a whole bag of spinach in something when it's just me. So yeah, portioning that out as well is great.
Absolutely. So a few other things, you know, I think really planning your meals and reinventing your leftovers can save so much food waste.
Yeah.
Also, you know, knowing your portion sizes. So, you know, there's a stat that shows that 25% of all food waste is due to actually cooking too much in the first place. So what can be really helpful for this is, you know, just having a quick Google of standard portion sizes for when you're cooking things like rice and pasta. I'm the worst with pasta. I tend to cook loads, like for a family of 10, and then we're having it for days after. And I think, you know, if you do enjoy your leftovers, then that's great. We do in this household, you know, most of our lunches are actually leftovers or reinvented in some way, or in a wrap or pitta. But if you don't, I know some people don't like eating the leftovers, then, you know, have a look at standard portion sizes. Like a cup of rice would feed about 4 people.
Yeah.
So, you know, just things like that are good to bear in mind.
Perfect. So do you have any kind of, I know you've talked about meal planning a bit and kind of shopping tips, but do you have any more things with kind of thinking about food waste?
Yeah, so as I said, it's good to plan out like 5 to 6 dinners a week. I think that, you know, we're creatures of habit, so breakfast tends to be similar. Yeah. So, you know, you can go to the extent of planning breakfast and lunch as if you want to. But I always think if you're well stocked in the cupboard, it helps you create meals out of nothing almost. And in our household, we like to eat predominantly vegetarian-based foods. But we may eat meat, perhaps, you know, if it's in the reduce section, because, you know, we're stopping it going into the bin. And it's just a nice way to have it. Obviously, my boyfriend absolutely loves meat, so we don't deprive him all the time. But we also like to stock up the freezer with kind of vegetarian protein options. So that, you know, on those days which you don't feel like making a whole meal from scratch, then it's a really good place to start.
No, definitely. We had a question for you about how to keep fruit and veg fresh for longer.
Yeah, great question. So I think that often in our fridges, we tend to overcrowd things. So to start with, to make sure everything has enough space. I mean, most food spoilage occurs because of moisture and because of its exposure to air. So, you know, if we think about storing things like leaves and salad, a little tip is to store those in Tupperware with a little kitchen towel in there.
Amazing.
So it's kind of reducing the moisture within the Tupperware, or you can even just put the kitchen towel into the bag and then roll it up with a nice little food clip. So it's kind of reducing the amount of moisture and reducing the air to those products as well.
That's a great tip. I'm going to definitely do that. So thank you.
And if you know you're concerned about using too many kitchen towels, you can buy almost like J cloths, which work just as well, and then you can kind of wash those out and reuse those as well.
Amazing.
So that's kind of you know, salads and leaves. When it comes to onions and potatoes, they obviously needed to be stored in a dry, cool place. I see some people storing onions in the fridge, which you don't necessarily need to do. Well, definitely don't need to do. And, you know, they like to be dry, away from moisture as well. But if you do find yourself with a lot of leftover onions, then you can chop these up and freeze these in bags as well. So you can just take it out of the freezer in a nice Ziploc bag and then add it into, you know, whatever you're cooking on that day. So for herbs, I mean, there's so many different things you can do with herbs. And I did a post a while ago about, you know, blending these into oils and putting them in the freezer. Hard herbs tend to work nicely in things like butter. So you can make a little
What's
butter.
A hard herb?
A hard herb is things like rosemary, sage, thyme, oregano, those kind of things. And actually, let me go see if I have some now.
Love it.
There might be some in here. So we grow all the herbs that we can in our garden. Oh, there's mere. I'm not going to show you, there's dust in here. But we tend to, so when I go out to the garden, I tend to cut off quite a lot of herbs, so like a bunch in one go. Actually, with things like rosemary and thyme, I tend to just leave those on the side and they end up drying out.
Okay.
And then, you know, if I'm making a bolognese or I want something with a little bit more flavour in it, I literally just take the bunch and kind of ruffle off the leaves, and then you've got dried herbs.
Top tip there.
I always kind of forget that I do that. But yeah, it's just a really nice way to kind of store your herbs. And if you do end up cutting too much from the garden, then they can be used as dried as well. For soft herbs, these are often better. So you can, as displayed here, put these in a leftover jar and put about 1 inch of water in the bottom to keep them fresh. Or you can wrap them up in kitchen paper, or as I said before, like a J cloth or some kind of dry dishcloth as well. And that helps to, you know, take all the moisture out and to keep them nice and fresh and not floppy. Obviously, eventually they will, you know, go a bit brown and sad. But you can always blend them into things like pestos, or, you know, what else can you blend them into? Like a nice little coriander dressing. And, you know, it's just infusing a little bit of flavour into your dishes.
That sounds, I actually want to go out and buy some, like, the plant myself and do all this over my meals.
I also find that when you buy, you know, like a big bunch of fresh herbs from like a farmer's market or greengrocer or something, they do store for so long like this as well. So just make sure you have enough space in the fridge to have like a couple of jars set up as well.
That's great. And we also had a question from somebody who tends to get a fruit and veg box delivered, and they usually always have a white cabbage and they don't really know what to do with it. So do you have any suggestions?
Absolutely. So I think, with things like white cabbage or greens or any kind of leaves, it's always a good idea to like finely slice these through your stir fry mix. Because essentially a stir fry mix is just a load of chopped vegetables. And you can make these yourself with Chinese leaf and Hispi cabbage, lots of different types of cabbage. Or, as displayed here, you can decide to pickle your cabbage to make a sauerkraut or a pickled cabbage type situation. And I've had this in my fridge for months. And I personally love like a pickled tangy flavour. Obviously you may not, and you may make like a quick pickle, which you can use almost immediately, and that doesn't have such a strong taste. Other ideas for cabbage, you can, grate that through coleslaw, or you can add them to, stews or minestrone, or you could even like blend it through mash. Or yeah, lots of different ideas for cabbage there.
So your pickled cabbage that you've done, how long will you keep that for until you've eaten it all, basically?
So the main point is to make sure that all the cabbage is submerged underneath the pickling liquor. And I normally do this by using like the butt end of the cabbage, and then you just push it down. But some people, you can weigh it down with, a little kind of a jar weight or something, just to keep it underneath. And I mean, that will last for months. You don't necessarily have to keep that in the fridge. You can keep that ambient room temperature as well. But yeah, until it starts going a bit funky, maybe.
Top tip there.
Pickling is a very like ancient way of preserving foods. So I'd say at least a couple of months, unless you're not enjoying the flavour, then maybe it's time to head to the compost heap.
So what are your top kitchen essentials for creating recipes? I mean, you're amazing at creating recipes. I'm the type of person that I'm very literal, so I kind of need a book in front of me to kind of know where I'm going. So it'd be really interesting to see like what your top tips were.
Okay, so I think that when it comes to kitchen equipment, I always find, buy the best that you can afford at that moment, because we often, you can go to Tesco and buy a knife for £10. That might be great.
Yeah.
But if you're putting that knife in the dishwasher, if you're not washing it by hand, if you are, not sharpening that knife regularly, then it can deteriorate pretty quickly, and we normally end up just going to buy another knife. So when it comes to knives, I think, one good knife is enough. This is my favorite knife.
You have a favorite knife. I love it.
Yeah, I have a favorite knife. And this does everything for me. Like, I don't really need any other knives. Obviously, in other situations, I may want a slightly smaller knife if I'm just cutting up a bit of fruit for breakfast.
Yeah.
But I make sure that I wash this by hand and sharpen it regularly so that it's going to, withstand the test of time.
So do you wash it by hand because it rusts more if you put it in the dishwasher, or what's the reason?
Yeah, so potentially, if it's sitting in the dishwasher, it's quite a moist environment, that may rust. But I mean, if you've got a good quality knife, then it shouldn't tend to do that. Also, other things banging around in the dishwasher will also cause it to chip and, maybe damage it in different ways. So it's just a little bit of knife care there. I think the next thing is a really good non-stick pan. So this is my favorite pan. And we've had this for years, and it's probably towards the end of its life. This was from M&S. Is dishwasher safe, but again, if you're washing it by hand, it does tend to last a lot longer. And obviously just, really practical things like try not to put anything too sharp in there, like using forks when you're stirring things. You can use silicone or like a wooden spoon or something, then it does help to preserve the non-stick. Other things, so these are very cheap and available things, but I think they are so essential for storing foods, things like Tupperware.
Yeah.
Now, storing Tupperware is my actual nemesis, and I'm not going to show you my like these are from the local takeaway, we just wash these out, but also jars. I'm a bit of a jar freak. I don't know if you can see behind. But I literally keep, the odds and ends and bits and bobs. Got like leftover nuts, when you finish a jar. Like here I've just got like some leftover lentils. But it's always good to keep those ends at the end of the packet without having to keep the whole packet.
Yeah.
And obviously keeps it stored nicely as well.
Yeah.
Other things, food clips, as I've been playing with here. Really simple things that are reusable. Other things which I've been meaning to order are, those like reusable silicone food lids. So you can like put them over bowls, those kind of things, and that helps with storage in the fridge as well.
Oh,
I mean, I could go on with kitchen essentials. I think, a bit of a luxury is probably like a food blender or a food processor, which just makes your life a little bit easier. But, if you've got an oven, then you're pretty good to
go. Sounds great. So then coming to creating recipes, like, I don't know, it's the end of the day, you look in the fridge, you've got hardly anything that doesn't really look like a meal. How do you create a meal from what you already have, rather than having to kind of, I don't know, try and order a takeaway or go out and buy some other food, just using up what you have? How do you create your amazing recipes?
Okay, great question. So to start with, I always, have a think about what kind of meal I want. So do I want pasta? Do I want a risotto or a salad? Do I want burgers or patties, frittatas, tray bakes, meatballs, all the different kind of things? And it's almost good to have a list of those, so that when you're in that situation, you can think, okay, well, what can I, what's the end goal? Yeah. Then, it's all about having well-stocked cupboards for me. So you've got to have a good selection of staple carbohydrates, so rice and pasta. And, every time I do a food shop, I tend to buy, a new pasta or rice or grain that I haven't tried before, just to keep things interesting. Then when it comes to like herbs, spices and flavors, I think it's quite helpful, to buy things like seasoning mixes or curry pastes. And those are really good just to have like in the back of the cupboard, so that, you can make a curry out of pretty much anything. You just whack in a little paste, you can add in some coconut milk or some chopped tomatoes, and away you go. I guess the protein source is often, the one which may stump you. But, we've got things like beans in tins. Also the freezer, as I mentioned before, we tend to have a store of like vegetarian or, leftover meats and things like that. That we just keep coming back to. So by then you've got, your flavor, you've got the style of dish that you want, you've got a protein source from either the store cupboard or the freezer or even fresh. And then, you add in your staple carbohydrate and kind of create the dish from there.
Like magic.
I think a lot of it, is, and I tell my clients this all the time, is that maybe that they try one new recipe a week, and then they can kind of reuse the same flavor combinations or reuse the same cooking techniques from one dish to another. And it is all pretty transferable skills between one recipe to another. And that's why I always like to give lots of options with my recipes for different ingredients.
Yeah, no, that just sounds, that's really, really great. And I think that's probably where I personally stumble, is if I don't know exactly what I'm doing and have to create something from scratch. Sometimes the best meals come from doing that. But it's actually having that brain power, like at the end of the day, when you're tired, like thinking about, oh God, now I have to do dinner, what can I have? But just knowing that you've got a few staples there, a few combinations that work really well, makes it a whole lot easier. So final question then, we're nearly at the end of Feb, coming into March. Do you have any kind of tips on using the foods that will be in season in March?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, you know, eating seasonal has become a bit of a trend recently, but we must remember that this is most helpful when we're looking at UK seasonal. So the, you know, idea around eating seasonal food is good because we're reducing food miles. We're eating the foods that are at its best at that time, so it makes it more tasty. They're often better quality. You'll also find that most seasonal foods will be on offer at that time of year when it is in season, making it a little bit cheaper. And, you know, we know that things like retaining nutrients over food miles does degrade as you get further away from the source. So, you know, we've got lots of exciting things to look forward to as we're moving forward to, into March. So, you know, the seas are warming up. We're moving into more salads and, you know, tarts. And I always love this time of year because you get to, like, you start getting excited about summer and fresh foods and away from kind of those heartier stews and soups and things that we've been having. So as the seas are warming up, you know, there's a lot of UK shellfish coming into season. So things like clams and cockles and mussels and halibut. Oh, so good. Yeah. So easy.
Love it.
You know, as I always say, try to buy MSC assured or look for an MSC label where possible, which means that it's being farmed in more sustainable ways. We've also got things to look forward to like spring lamb and pork and lots of really nice greens and leaves. So things like chicory and spring greens, purple sprouting broccoli, kale, watercress, spring onions, you know, all these lovely fresh maybe peppery leaves that we can start adding into things like warm salads as well. We've got lots of citrusy fruits coming in, so things like grapefruits and oranges. Blood oranges are my absolute favorite at the moment. They're so good. And also, you know, our good old friend the Jerusalem artichoke, which often gets left behind. But you know, I might try and make a Jerusalem artichoke recipe soon.
Yeah, I think artichoke is a funny one. Like having it with a fish stew would go really well. It's off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Yum yum yum. Anyway, that was. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. That you've given us so many wonderful tips, and there's so much that I'm actually going to take away from this as well. So thank you so much. If people want to kind of find out more about you or can follow you, where should they go?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at Root to Nutrition, also on Facebook at Root to Nutrition, and you can find me at www.roottonutrition.com, which is very easy to remember. Yeah, feel free to, you know, get in contact with me. I've got a lot of friends who tend to send me their you know, sad, out of date ingredients out of the fridge and think, what am I going to do with this, Alice? So, you know, if you're ever in a sticky situation, then just let me know.
You're going to be inundated now you said that. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again.
No worries. Thanks for having me.